Welcome to the Pastors Podcast. I have with me here Scott.
That's me.
And Matt.
Hey.
Taking over the podcast.
And I, Brian, have wrestled the host microphone from Scott Mell for this extra special episode of the Pastors Podcast, where we're going to talk about parenting and technology. We spent a decent amount of time over the summer talking about technology. And one of the things we heard from some people, and also I think recognized ourselves, is the unique relationship that parents have to technology, especially when it comes to how they parent their kids of various ages through the challenges and opportunities of technology in a way that if you're a parent today, you probably didn't have the same relationship to technology when you were a kid. And so how do you handle that? What kind of wisdom is there to offer? And so I've taken the host microphone so I can leverage some of that wisdom out of Scott and Matt as we go through some different questions, trying to outline what it looks like to parent well and wisely on this. Like everything we do, we won't cover everything. It won't be all the wisdom there is, but hopefully when you're done listening, you have more than you started with, whether you're a parent yourself or someone who is near and dear to parents and their kids in your life. You can be of help there.
How does it feel to host, Brian?
It feels nice.
You're doing great, man.
You're doing great.
Okay?
You're doing so good.
You feeling good?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to affirm you.
Yeah.
The stress is not showing.
We don't do a lot of good affirmation and encouragement. That's probably one of the weakest one another's we have amongst the pastoral
It
staff.
has historically, but I feel like we've gotten a lot better.
You've gotten better.
I guess a little bit better.
As long as the
Historically, I'm just saying, we want to
listeners
be
can't hear the flop sweat or see the flop sweat that's happening.
Hear the flop
Yeah,
sweat.
that would be a lot.
That is brutal.
Where's Adam with some sound effects?
Yeah.
We just need some.
We'll see. We'll see if we listen back. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to split this up into a few different categories when it comes to technology and parenting. We're going to talk about idolatry. We'll talk about distraction. We'll talk about pornography, which is just a huge concern. I think for parents, both, especially in terms of their kids. And so...
Wait. So how many categories do we have, Brian?
Three.
Okay.
One of the many reasons I wrestled
Nailed
control
it.
of the host microphone. So one of the big dangers with technology is the way it can become either an idol itself or it can enable idolatry kind of through its use. And so one of the first questions is, what are some of the ways that we see technology, screens particularly, when we think about technology, we're thinking about screens here, enabling our idolatry.
Not like the car.
Yeah, the wheel is not what we're going for. We're thinking more in terms of screens.
Technology is a big, broad topic.
Kids are really getting carried away with those wheels today.
Yeah.
I do love the idea of us promoting a podcast on parenting and technology, and it's all about
The mimeograph machine.
That's right.
They're copying things left and right, guys. All right. In what way do you see this happening?
No, I think when the question of parenting and technology comes up, that screens is the shorthand that most parents are using for, I need help with my kids and technology.
Video games,
Yep.
TV screens, computer screens, phones, iPads.
Exactly. And I think that, at the most basic level, when we talk about parenting and technology, we have to step back and talk about our relationship with technology, right? And this is where I think actually the previous podcasts that we've done would be really helpful. If you haven't listened to those, you've just kind of jumped into this. Considering your own relationship to technology is really key, because more than anything, I think your relationship to technology, your relationship to screens will be probably the singular most significant thing that will shape your kids' relationship to technology and to screens. And I think in that, like we've talked about before, it can be a huge blessing. Right, technology can magnify all sorts of good in the world, and it also magnifies the bad. You mentioned the issue of idolatry. It magnifies our idolatries. Oftentimes facilitates and makes more and more accessible our idolatries. So whether that's things like the idol of communication or productivity or significance or information, right? These are the things that oftentimes drive us to our screens, right? Because again, sometimes we're utilizing screens for good, for all sorts of things. But the things when we feel like addicted or when we are drawn in, I think the things that oftentimes are drawing us, the fleshly things, are our idolatries. And so I think that's, first of all, important to ask of ourselves, to consider our relationship with our screens and things like that. But to me, that's actually a really important gateway in to thinking about and talking about our kids' relationships to technology, our kids' relationships to screens. Because I don't know a parent who's not like, how do I get them off screens, right? What else do I do? Like, how do we deal with, or how do we navigate this? And like anything, I think Christ throughout his life, I mean, I'm thinking particularly the Sermon on the Mount, kept taking, he's like, no, it's not about the rule. It's about the heart, right? Like what's going on in the heart. And I know as a parent, it seems like it just takes too much time to really think about the heart. Like I just want the results. I want to do some behavior management and I got to figure this out. But the real question, if I'm going to get at the heart, the real question is why, not only why am I drawn to my screen, but why are they drawn to their screen, right? Why is it that, what is it that they're looking to get from it? What is it that it delivers to them? And like we talked about in the earlier technology podcast, like what are the benefits and what are the trade-offs that come with that thing they're pursuing?
What were the list of idolatry? You had a kind of a list you went through there. You went kind of fast.
So I was talking about, one is like for us particularly as parents, like an idolatry of communication. Like I just want to be connected, right? I want to, and I think in kids, this oftentimes that connection, that idolatry of connection, can manifest in like a fear of missing out, right? Like this is where everyone's doing it. Kind of comes from like this connection is where I get my ultimate.
Can you explain the difference between that and like just a desire for connection?
Yeah,
like there's a good facilitation of connection through technology as well, for both us as parents and for our kids.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, if we're going to talk about just kind of idolatry 101, an idol is anything that we in our hearts make more important to or more significant to us than God, right? And something we make more important to us than God in our thoughts, in our dreams, in our desires, in our kind of ruminating. And so it's the type of thing that I go, when I look to that thing for significance, for joy, for happiness. We've talked about this a lot actually over the years in our house, the pursuit of happiness, right? Where like happiness isn't a bad thing, but when it becomes the ultimate thing, or even what the things I chase to give me happiness, regardless of, and this is why, you're like, why are you ignoring real people in the room? Like when that screen's not that important, right? The game you're playing is not more significant in the huge world is not more important than the person standing in front of you, the parent who's asking you to do something, right? But to them in that moment, it is more important, right? It is actually of ultimate importance. It's like, no, this is more important than what God wants me to do, than what you want me to do. And I guess I want us to see and think about that in categories, in heart, in engaged categories, particularly as kids get older, right? I'm not talking about like a 3-year-old with a screen who cries when you take it away, right? But I'm talking about as kids get older and engage, and you're helping them see their hearts, and because I think that also exposes the depth of our need for God's grace, and it opens the door for conversations about the depth and magnitude of God's grace. It says, no, I don't see this as a problem, but actually there's a lot of oftentimes idolatry at work. And I think that because so much is so accessible through our screens, it's literally a smorgasbord of all the possible desires and idolatries they could have. It's built to specifically hook into our natural proclivities and our idolatries. And so I think we need to think of it in those categories. So I think it's helpful to think of it in those categories.
So how do you tell which one your kids are struggling with? If it's a giant buffet, all available, and you want to parent the heart, how do you know? How do you diagnose? How do you have that conversation when your initial response is, I want them to be off the screen, or whatever you kind of the superficial kind of external response is. I want less of this. I want them to not do that. I want to protect them from this. How do you know how to get to the heart with a kid on this kind of issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, well, first of all, I think you're looking for kind of evidence of those heart issues, right? That there's kind of things, and when I think of this is like idolatry 101. Like idolatry 101 for an adult is disproportionate responses. Like when I engage in disproportionate responses, oftentimes it's like, well, wait, your heart's grabbing onto something, right? When I get when somebody spills milk in the kitchen and I blow up, right? Well, okay, I there's something I cared about. There was something I was that seemingly justifies in my heart this overwrought response, right? Like I didn't care that much about the milk, right? So there's something else that's captivated my heart. And I think that that's where we can see things like disproportionate responses. I mean, I think all the kind of classic technology engagement like behaviors oftentimes are evidences of that, like that idolatry. That's something I'm grabbing onto. Disproportionate responses, the 1 more minute syndrome, right? Like tunnel vision, right? Really addiction to any degree. Even for us as adults, like our downtime habits oftentimes reveal our idolatries, right? What we do when we have a minute. And the same is true with our kids when they have a minute. Now, let me just say, like, let me just take a step back and say, like, I guess I would say the problem's deeper and more significant in our kids and their relationship to technology than we want to tend to normally deal with. The hope for that is that's what we should expect, right? Number one, if they don't know Christ yet, like that's the natural, like they don't have any brakes on that. Like it is like fully engaged. Number two, even if they do know Christ, or as they're growing in Christ, they lack a significant amount of growth, of maturity, of self-control, of the fruit of the Spirit. And so those things shouldn't be surprises. Like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my kids? Or how did we mess up? Like, no, that's normal. The question is, how do we help steer them? How do we help protect them at times from the developing? And then how do we show them grace and show them Christ's forgiving and redeeming and empowering work in the midst of that?
How do you, like, I guess part of the question, and I think it comes to the parental side of just like rules and, having guidance and, if you have a specific amount of screen time or specific rules that govern screen time, how do those rules and getting to the heart connect with one another, and how, I guess maybe in conversations or sort of in the communication about it, or questions you ask, or the things you notice in the idolatry that you're seeing in your kids? Like, how do the rules together, working together with the heart, function together, I suppose?
Oh man, that's a great question. Do you want to answer?
No, I want you to answer.
Matt's trying to take the host microphone from me.
No, I'm not. You have a lot to say, Scott. I'm just listening. I'm listening. I mean, there's a lot of things.
Such a great question.
Because one thing that comes up in our household, and we have sort of guidance and specific rules about it, but about that govern the use of it. Right? Mm-hmm. We have rules that govern the use of it. Now we've communicated why those rules exist to our kids and try to help them facilitate it. But oftentimes where the rubber meets the road is at those rules, rather than at the heart. And it only is when there's other conversations later on about what's going on where we can dig deeper into the heart. Because in the practicalities of life, right? The practicalities of life, you don't have time every 4:30 p.m. To have a 45-minute conversation with your child about what idolatries are going on in their heart for why they're watching YouTube still after their allotted time or whatever it is, right?
For sure.
Those are the
For
questions.
sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I guess I would say when it that develops as they grow older, right? Like those, so the depths of those conversations develop as they grow older and as they have capacity to it. And in one sense, it's why the rules are actually, I think, really helpful and really important on the front end. Part of this is, I think, if we recognize our kids, this tendency in our kids towards idolatry and really the magnifying glass that screens are towards their idolatries, that will make us really cautious.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll set up guidelines and we'll try to protect them.
And I think the disproportionate response to those guidelines oftentimes is a revealer of idolatry.
For sure. And so that's
you say there's 30 minutes. You have 30 minutes to, watch this show.
Yep.
And then it's over. And like, even if there's specific, you could have, and we have specific cutoffs. For example, on a Nintendo Switch, there's a parental guide that we have on it. And you can only play it for a certain amount of time. And otherwise, there's a code that I only have. Only I have. Nicole doesn't even have it to approve any extra time.
Because she loves Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, no, but yes, I have to restrict her.
So much Zelda, just all the time.
Tears of the Kingdom again? It's 3 a.m, babe. But I guess what I'm saying is, like the disproportionate response in light of that is what oftentimes where those hard conversations are.
And I think I would say where those things come up and you're like, oh man, this is like revealing all sorts of idolatry and it really has its hooks in, but like you're not developed enough to have this conversation, right? To really understand what's going on. I think to me that means they're not developed enough to utilize a tool that powerful. Right. So like, okay, no, I have to keep these things, like we have to keep, and it might just be a fight logistically on the front end. And that's true, especially when kids are younger, right? Like you're not talking with them about like their hearts or their desires. Although I think, what are you wanting? What are you desiring? I think there's all sorts of creative ways to have those conversations.
I think there's a worldview development of technology as a tool, but not an ultimate thing. Exactly. Like something that it can be useful. It can be, but even with young kids, I mean, even with kids as young as 5, helping them understand that a screen is a powerful thing. And can be powerful really for good, powerful for danger, and helping them recognize that even from an early age, I think is really important for framing and helping them understand the potential of idolatry even later on.
Exactly. And then I think as you go, you shift those rules, those guidelines, just like you do in your own life, according to what helps develop self-control, what sets them up to succeed, what gives them opportunities to succeed and fail, to learn and to grow and develop themselves. But that's different kid to kid, right? Situation to situation. Like there's all sorts of dynamics there. But I think that it doesn't work without guidelines, right? Without practice. That's not parenting. You're not helping them nurture that. I guess I want to just insert the side that just rules don't develop a worldview. And one of the pieces that we talk about in our relationship with technology is the way in which it magnifies our idolatries, and that's an important one that we need to engage with and help our kids develop as well. Both idolatry of technology itself and the way it just kind of magnifies and gives opportunity for our idolatries.
There's so much to be talked about here that makes this conversation challenging. But one of the things for at least my kids, a lot of the older kids, a lot of their homework is done on computers.
Yeah.
So the restriction on computer use is really challenging.
Yeah.
And there's already website restrictions and other things already on there. But it can be really hard to even identify and control how much
the right
time
number is.
Because of the work that is to be done. Now we normally do it. A lot of the homework and stuff is done together at a kitchen table in a public space and those kind of things. There's certain things that govern it, and we always we have regular conversations about homework and what studying is needed and what kind of tests there are, what kind of homework that needs to be done. But it is one of those challenging components to say like, okay, are you and it's like games too. Sometimes they're like homework is like playing a game too. Like we were like, Caleb, stop playing this game. And he's like, that's not a game. It's a homework. It's a homework assignment. It's a math assignment that has like some sort of game. It's gamified.
Gamification. Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I don't even know what to tell you. Is that technology? Is it not technology? How do I help them navigate that? But those are really challenging questions.
Yeah.
So to try and get our arms around where we've been, it sounds like on the one hand, parenting in general, kind of at any age of the child, requires some kind of rules. There needs to be things that guide and govern the use of technology in the home. If there's none of that, it's going to be very difficult to do what you need to do. And yet those function like scaffolding with a building, right? You can't build the building without the scaffolding, but the scaffolding isn't supposed to be the building. So the rules like guide and govern what's going on, but the goal of parenting with technology is not simply scaffolding. It's getting to the heart, and that's going to involve some kind of idolatry talk, some kind of your desires for this are outpacing your desires for greater things. How do we navigate that? And so before we move on from this one, I want to ask, what does that kind of conversation look like? And maybe more specifically, given that idolatry is in different ways kind of unique to the person, unique to the child. Like you said, Scott, there's different kinds that show up in different ways. What would you tell parents who are like, that sounds great listening to talking about idolatry. How in the world do I do that with a kid, with my 14-year-old, my 10-year-old? What would you tell them?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it obviously looks different at different ages, but at the core, I'm asking the question about what is the desire that is ultimately motivating this? Like, what do you want? Like, what are you afraid of? Fear is actually a great kind of determiner of heart and idolatry. In other words, like, what are you afraid of if you don't spend this time? Right? Is it social engagement? Is it boredom? Is what are you? And even just to help them ask the question, why am I stuck on this screen? Why do I have? What do I desire and long for that is outpacing this? Maybe it's maybe it's something socially engaged, right? It's a fear of other people and kids and reputations and things like that. Maybe it's avoidance of something in the home or something at school, right? I think but I'm going to ask a number of questions around, and part of this is also just taking the time to have these conversations with your kids. Like that's the win. Like I also don't want parents to feel like there's like two questions that are the thing that will unlock the thing. But just having these conversations with your kids, engage them, connecting these deeper questions to the rules, to the guidelines, to their thinking, maybe even giving them space and time to think about it. Actually, I was reminded of something just yesterday. I don't remember what I was listening to. But
probably the Pastor's Podcast.
But that's right. But the most common response you will get to lots of questions with kids is I don't know. Right? And even there, it's easy for us to want to just give up at that point. Be like, okay, well, or honestly, if it's me, just to get frustrated. Like, well, come on, like, just think, like, but I think a helpful question even from there is, if you did know, what do you think? Like, or if you did know, what might it be? Right? What could you be desiring? Like and what are things that you're like, actually, no, I know that's not it. right? And so even giving them suggestions, talking with them, helping them, sharing with, and this is where also I think sharing with them your desires, the things that draw you to screens, the things you struggle with, opens the door both for insight into their hearts and for them to see the gospel at work in your life as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think at some level, asking questions like, what are you feeling? And then, why are you afraid, or what do you want? What are the emotions you're experiencing? And then being able to ask why, or what about this would fix it? like what about this would change it? Why do you think this would be the thing that would make you feel better, or take away things like that? I feel like from a young age can be pretty helpful, and even their own kind of scaffolding. When you have younger kids, and I'm not talking like 5, but let's say a 10-year-old. It can be hard to have a sustained conversation about deep, nuanced heart questions, but just asking a couple of salient questions like that, I think, can begin to build them towards those kind of conversations later in life. Because if you never are given the tools to look at yourself through that lens, it's very hard, to do it later. And so the point of all of this, I think, is just that we come to the question of parenting and technology and kind of go, how do we get them off screens more? And the first thing we encounter is this giant, like, your heart is super important. And this is really intense and complicated, because human beings are complicated, and technology isn't just a thing to do or not do, but a window into what you love and don't love, and how those loves might be not ordered the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. We should move on. I promised 3 things, and as host, I will deliver. The second was distraction. Which at some level, the rest of what we're going to talk about is going to relate back to idolatry in some way, shape, or form. We started kind of at the heart of things, and then you're going to move out. But when we talk about technology and distraction, it seems like that is related to the idea of technology as addiction too. There's a way that we're it's a means of distraction, and we kind of get addicted to that distraction. Mm-hmm. And so what are some ways that maybe you see it in your own life, or you've experienced it? What are the ways that some people can identify that in their lives? And then how does that map onto parenting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of the reasons this is one of those kind of key things to talk about is because I think this is one of the most significant and most common ways we relate to screens is we're simply looking for a distraction, and we grab it out of distraction.
An escape.
Not only that, is I think this is actually the most common reason we hand a screen to our kids. We're actually looking for it to distract them. We use it as a tool for distraction. And here's the thing. I don't want to demonize that. Like, everybody does it. We all do it. We've done it.
Redirection in other parts of parenting.
That's right. That's right.
You also can't be like 100% on 100% all the time.
No, exactly. Right? Distraction is not fundamentally necessarily a bad thing. But I do think it's important for us to see that for what it is, which is in that sense, kind of a momentary coping mechanism, not a way of developing healthy habits. And so to the extent that we utilize it in our own lives as a distraction, in our parenting as a distraction, as long as we understand what it is, right? That's good. But when it becomes kind of our go-to reflex, both in our lives, when we grab screens out of distraction as our go-to reflex in our lives, and as when we hand screens as reflex, as our go-to, I think we are, I think it's important that we understand that we're both essentially nurturing addiction in our hearts when we do it, and that we're nurturing that in our kids too. And just like anything else, it can be used well, but overused, it can be it can be a distraction from reality, right? From the things that we actually want to entrust to them.
Well, there's a couple of things. I think it's really important to recognize that app developers, people who make entertainment, like know this and specifically design things purposefully to try to make it happen, to try to facilitate this in the lives of both kids and parents. But, it's interesting. Seeing the distraction connection to idolatry, one of the things that I think is helpful in this world, just even as like a practical tip for ourselves, for me as an adult and for our kids. And I love what you said earlier about modeling it, Scotty, because I see my own failures modeled in my kids' lives in this area in some ways. But there's something to be said about you can really see and feel idols when you take them away. And we think about something like fasting. Okay, we always say fasting and we think immediately about food, but actually media fasts I think are really, really helpful in our oversaturated, highly technologically oversaturated culture. And just for yourself, okay, before you even do your kids, before you even think about a media fast with your kids, take something that you're constantly going to technologically, your phone, YouTube, social media, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, right? And this comes up in counseling. I mean, I just had a counseling situation a few weeks ago where we did the screen time thing. Let's look at your screen time on your phone, and let's take a look at like how much time is actually being spent in these other scenarios, right? Doing these things you don't even realize, right? Wow, 4 hours a day on Instagram. I had no idea, right? Just say, okay, just a day, just one day. Start with a day and just say like, hey, like I'm going to take a day and I'm going to not be on Instagram for a 24-hour period. Just like the habit of this. And you start seeing like how you respond to that. Like it's become a habit that has formed me in some way. I run to this when things are hard. Things are hard at work. Things are hard at home. Something difficult happens. I have a hard conversation. I'm stuck in traffic and I'm stressed out. I run to this as my coping mechanism. Like it's like, and you begin to see what's going on in your own heart. And I think the same thing is true with our kids. What happens when they, if you every day they come home from school and they watch a TV show? What happens if that doesn't happen? What happens on a Sunday afternoon when they always watch a movie? What happens if you say no video games today? No video games today. Like we're going to do a family day. We're going to go on walks. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to go grab ice cream. We're going to do things together. We're going to talk. We're going to have fun. We're going to, whatever it is, like we're going to do puzzles. There's a million other things you can do, but being intentional about that and saying, hey, like as a family, this is a tool. And the way that we remember it's a tool and not like the thing that feeds us or gives us hope or meaning and purpose, the piece of life, is by taking it away for a time and seeing how things go. I think there's like little practical things that can be done here to help facilitate growth in these areas for ourselves and for our kids.
Okay, so this is so interesting, Matty, because I think that's exactly where my head went, in the fact that when we see this addiction, when we see the distraction, one of the greatest tools the Lord has given us is fasting, right? Is digital fasts. And so let's just talk about us for a second, right? Just us. So not our kids, but whether that's times without digital, whether that's digital vacations, right? Digital fasts on a regular basis, digital vacations, even once a year, even just digital free spaces or times of the week, like time in your week or spaces in your life, spaces in your home that are digital free. It's, and if that's not a part of your regular life, then I wouldn't start by trying to implement things to your kids, right? So I start being like, no, okay, let's get off screens. Like I would just listen to a podcast, and they said, screens are addictive, and okay, let's stop that. Like that's not where you start. You start with you, and you're like, well, how do I know what to do? How do I know where to start? If you begin to create that space in your life, the digital fast, the space without the times where you're like, no, this is reserved. But God is going to meet you in those spaces. He's going to teach you things. And then you have the opportunity to take and share those things you're learning with your kids and to look for creative ways to engage them with the things that God is showing you. And that is so much richer than, okay, what are the 3 rules so that my kids don't end up messed up, right? Like that's kind of what we want. But really, God wants to meet you in those times. And then when he does, he wants you to share that with your kids. And all of a sudden, that's authentic. That's not like, okay, let's, because your kids see it in your life. They see the benefit and the joy in it. And then even if they do it begrudgingly at first, there's something really genuine about it, that you're sharing something beautiful that you've seen with it. And so that's where that goes back to all parenting. I think parenting is about genuinely meeting God and sharing with your kids the goodness of what he's doing in your life, more than it is about getting all the rules right.
There is a lot of commonality there. I mean, one thing that you said early on, Scott, that comes back around here is that like everything that we do as parents, we just become kind of the default pace setter for our kids as they get older. I mean, Matt, you talked about counseling. I mean, we've done our share of premarital counseling here. And what's one of the things you always talk about? It's like, well, you have a default sense of what marriage is like, or, for better or worse, from your parents' marriage or divorce, right?
Yeah.
You know what it means to be maybe a parent, a father or a mother, from your experience of those people when you were younger. And the same thing's true of technology. You're going to be the trendsetter. It's kind of a convicting question to ask. Do I want my kids to have the relationship with their phone the way I have one with my phone? Like, do I want them to have my relationship with my phone? But even more, personally, how many times do your kids come to you, especially on the younger side, and what's the question? I'm bored.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, good.
Yeah.
If you're me, you're like, good. Believe it or not, social science says it's good for your brain to be bored, and then you kind of think to yourself, how often do I let myself be bored? And not that often. I find both positive and distracting ways to get rid of most boredom in my life. And I think it's a fascinating thing to ask how to embody it yourself, so that your kids might have a different kind of relationship with distraction than you do. There's a lot of net benefit there. And so I think that's really intriguing. And there's probably more we could talk about, but the big question that I think a lot of people have with the danger of technology and screens is the proliferation of easily accessible pornography. It's not just a male issue anymore. Maybe it never was all the way, but it definitely was skewed that way. It's far more equitable now between men and women, between girls and boys. The average age of exposure is profoundly young, like just scarily young. I want to say it's like 12, 13, 14 right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that screens are kind of everywhere, and that pornography can be found on just about any of those screens if someone tries hard enough, or if they just make a simple mistake. And so when you look at that, talk a bit about the dangers of internet pornography, of that kind of proliferation. And then could you talk a bit about how, I guess a two-sided question, how do you guard against it? And then what happens when those guards fail?
Yeah. I mean, so I think in one sense, the danger of it is probably pretty clear to most people. And connected to that is the highly, because it's so hidden, because it taps into this powerful aspect of our humanity, there's a highly addictive quality to it. And so the danger is significant. How do we guard against it? I think, how do we guard against it, and what do we do when those guards fail? First of all, I think we need to expect that those guards in one way or another are going to fail. I think it is a false hope to say that we can protect kids from ever seeing anything. At the same time, we need to do our best to not be irresponsible with the technology in our lives. I think
there has to be an urgency.
Absolutely.
And like a seriousness.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, unfiltered, unaccountable internet in the house is like leaving a loaded gun. I think it's just as irresponsible as leaving a loaded gun out in your house. Like we wouldn't do it. You wouldn't ever leave a loaded gun just sitting in your house because you're like, no, that could cause some really significant damage. And I think the same is true with unfiltered, unaccountable internet access. And so the first thing is, when kids are little, just not give, like, they don't need access. They don't need access to everything. They don't that can be very limited. This is where knowing what they have access to is really, like, and what comes up next, what pops up next, what gets suggested next, whether it's, in YouTube or whatever. Really locking down and limiting their access when they're young, I think, is a really important first step. As they get older, that gets harder and harder, both generally in the world, with school. I mean, I've tried to lock down things. Basically, I lock things down and then they can't do their schoolwork.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm trying to figure out how to, and so ultimately, I think more important long-term than locking everything down is accountability, accountability software, is the ability to know what they are seeing, what they're engaged in. So whether that's Covenantized or Accountable to You, or I don't know, there's a bunch of different companies that do it, but having accountability on every machine in your home is an important piece to guard against it. And then I think there's also just some common sense stuff. We still, all the way through high school, phones just aren't allowed in your bedroom without exception. They're just not. Computers aren't allowed in your bedroom without permission, as to know what you're doing. Mainly stuff is done in our common room. Still to this day,
the benefits of having small homes.
That's
Los
true.
Angeles.
That's true. I mean, even our teenagers, all of our kids' phones charge in our bedroom. All of their computers charge in our bedroom. It makes for a really messy corner. It's kind of annoying. There's just cords everywhere, but it's a small price to pay.
One less mess with one out of the house.
That's right. You'd think. But and so I think there's a lot of practical things to guard in that sense. And I think just taking it seriously is really important. Tim Challies has a digital family plan. You could just Google Tim Challies digital family plans. Are super, I've found really helpful over the years. There's lots of different resources out there for that. And then there's the question of what happens when those fail, but I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Matt.
No, I just think what you describe is a significant urgency. They will it will be found if you don't have protections. It will be found.
Absolutely.
And you have,
it's looking for them.
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
It's I mean, a lot of people will be exposed through just innocent searches with unfiltered internet access. And there's just a lot of technology available out there for parents to put a significant amount of time, app restrictions. The other thing I would say is one of the things we did for our kids, which we found really helpful, was not a need for a phone until we held out on phones as long as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even to the point where in middle school, when they needed some sort of phone at school, it was just an iPod Touch with no data and restricted internet, of course, and all these other things associated with it, so that when they're at school and they have access to the internet at school, they can text us through iMessage or whatever to say, hey, come pick us up. But basically, middle school, up through middle school, our kids don't have phones. They have ways to communicate without data, unlimited access, and all these other things, and similar rules about charging in public spaces and those kind of things.
Yeah.
One thing I'd toss in there is, from a young age, you can actually prepare kids for this. There's a book we have. It's like a picture book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Yeah. And it's a way for 5, 6, 7-year-olds. I mean, 7 might be getting a little old for this one, but it's a way of going, here's what happens when you might see things that are inappropriate. And here's kind of a way to think about it and what to do about it. I have one that's a little bit older, for kids are slightly older. And I think this pairs with what we've talked about in other parenting conversations as a church. We talk about how to talk to your kids about sex, and just the fact that if you keep that in the dark for a long, long period of time and keep it mysterious, you might be unintentionally setting them up for being more enticed and less prepared for what happens when they see something, on the internet. And so just giving them a sense that, hey, it's dangerous out there. And here's some steps to take if you or a friend shows you something or you stumble across something. Here's what you do. I think that can really help, in a sense, prepare them for what feels inevitable, But even before they might seem ready for that conversation, you can have it in a young version that starts to build up those categories for them.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Wish I had those books. Are those new?
They
No, they're
probably
really
are.
good. We use them with all our kids, even when Owen was
I
younger.
didn't even know about them. That's awesome.
Yeah, they're actually just really helpful.
That's awesome. So before we move on, there's maybe just a couple other quick thoughts I'll mention. One is just when a kid does get either a computer or a phone of their own, I think also just making the expectations of that really clear and explicit is important.
Your agreement.
Yeah. I mean, we have a 2-page smartphone contract that all of our kids have to sign, and that we update. And I mean, I'm happy to pass it along to anybody who wants it, could glean from it, because that's been really helpful, and it's helpful for us to go back to and be like, oh no, remember, like these are and it also kind of delineates the difference between, well, first of all, it breaks down into multiple tiers because a smartphone is actually a bunch of different tools. Yeah. And so that, even just that concept is really helpful, but that's a whole, that could be a whole nother discussion, but so that's one. And the other thing I would say is you inevitably, when it comes to restrictions, guidelines, expectations, things like that, you're going to get pushback from your kids. They're going to complain. This is what leads us to be like, how do I get them off their phone? How do I not give them a phone? Like, how do I do this? All these questions that I think we all feel as parents. And I think one of the most helpful reminders to me has been the reminder that you're the parent. Like, you're the parent. You can say, no, you can't do that. And they don't have to agree. They don't have to like it. Like you're going to, now, over time, you want to help win them over by having ongoing conversations, by hearing them out, by being a process but I think at every stage, I think it's just a helpful reminder that God's given us this authority that to exercise in a number of different ways.
This also feels a little bit, not like a gimme, but there are a few things, like I tell parents this a lot. You shouldn't like make your kid play piano if they hate it.
Totally.
But I have never met an adult who's told me, I wanted to quit piano when I was a kid. My parents let me, and I'm so glad they did. I've only ever met people who've been like, man, I kind of wish they would have made me do it.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a kind of a silly example, but I think with technology, this is one of those things that you can have a high degree of confidence that they might chafe under it when they're young. But this is one of those things I think as they get older, they're going to go, oh, that was a good idea. They might not agree with all your parenting decisions, but this one feels like a high likelihood that they're going to go, oh, okay, I see what you were doing there.
Totally.
I think
Totally. I think
even all the
point.
evidence coming out about social media and things like that, and delaying the use of social media, and even in some states, it's illegal for kids under a certain age to use social media because of the studies that have come out. I think the kids will say the same thing. They want to be on TikTok. They want to do all these things. It's not good for them.
Yeah. It's a great point. So, okay. So to come back around though, to your question, what do we do when they are exposed to pornography, when they go looking for it and find it, when they're exposed to it innocently? And to me, first of all, I think we need to, unfortunately, expect that that's a when question, not an if question. I think for the vast majority of it, it will be the exception if your child does not get exposed to it. And I think, at the core of the answer to this question is the gospel, right? At the core of the answer to this question is meeting them with love and grace and kindness. Because even if they stumbled across it innocently, their flesh engaged with it and they know there's something wrong about it, but they've tried to hide it, or so there's guilt, there's shame, there's suffering, and meeting them with kindness and understanding, not blowing up at them, not seeing that moment as as the verdict on our parenting, right? but meeting them where they're at and showing them grace, showing them kindness, explicitly coming back to the gospel and God's forgiveness and his grace and his redemption, helping them to begin that fight. Now that's going to take a whole host of different conversations because, they may have been completely scared of it and run away. And now that they know it's there, they may be really tempted to go looking for it again. And so, but again, meeting them with the grace of Christ in a lot of understanding. The other thing that I would say about that is, just as parents, I feel like I've had this conversation multiple times. I would just encourage parents to trust their gut. Like there's just something, God is kind and he loves your child. And if your child is getting engaged in something, the Lord wants that to come out. He wants it to be exposed. And sometimes if you're uneasy about something, if you're not sure, don't just look the other way. Like look into it, research, ask questions. Was it Ronald Reagan who said, trust but verify? Right. Trust what they're saying, but also, engage and look at it. There's, I think that type of intentionality and proactivity our kids desperately need. And every one of those, every time you push in is an opportunity to manifest and show the gospel, to convey the gospel in a powerful and really potentially intense moment in their lives.
Yeah, I think one thing that might be helpful here is to remember that in the midst of what is a genuinely negative thing, part of your response needs to be like a positive vision. And I think as a parent, when negative things happen like this in a kid's life, a lot of your own flesh gets animated, both fears of how you're ranking as a parent, fears of if this has done irrevocable damage to your child, ways that your fear and possibly your anger or frustration can get the best of you. And that can be the tenor and tone of your response. And what that does, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's just the way you're reacting to something negative is you say, this is bad. Here's why this is bad. It's really bad. It shouldn't happen again. And that, to be fair, those are all true statements.
Yeah.
But in this arena of talking about sex and sexuality, one of the things that becomes really important, I think, for Christians is to always come back to the positive vision of sex and sexuality for human beings, and to say that God's way is a better way, and it's a better in a way that's actually understandable for us. It's not just sort of something you can't understand, just believe it. There's a way that we can trust him that it is better. There's a way that we can see ways that it's better, and there are ways that we want to point you to the positive, the good, of which this is kind of a perversion, an inversion, a cheap substitute, something that appeals to a base part of you that's very real in all of us. But we don't want to just say, hey, that was bad. We want to be able to say, oh, but see how God's way is so much better. And then we want to be able to go, the way you go from one to the other is the gospel. It's Jesus Christ. It's forgiveness and grace, and seeing if he gave himself entirely for you, then how can you not trust him and give yourself entirely to him, even in these areas? And so I think there's just a way of constantly making sure that as a parent, even before something goes wrong, that the way you talk about these things is positive more than negative. It's proactive more than afraid. Even though that fear can be healthy and can be there, and because bad things happen, and you don't want to just neglect that and go, oh, don't worry, it's so wonderful. You do want to be able to say, my kids didn't just get what was wrong with everything. They got why it was wrong, because God's way is so right.
I think one of the most important components about that is whether it's pornography use or technology addiction, those things will leave your kids feeling empty. Just, they never satisfy. They never can, they never will. And so that positive vision of, you see how this doesn't satisfy your soul. You see how this makes you feel when you watch 8 hours of TV. You see how this makes you feel when there's all this hiddenness and shame and guilt and that comes associated with sex and sexuality in these twisted ways. There is hope, there is beauty, and there is a God who loves you in the midst of all this. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. That's so powerful. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, just to close it down, let's just talk for a minute about after that conversation, like something
Yeah.
goes wrong. You have a good talk about the gospel. How do you encourage that gospel hope going forward? And maybe not just in terms of how you ought to parent it going forward, but maybe let's talk for a moment to the parents who are going to find themselves in that situation. How is the gospel not just what you need your children in the midst of that situation to know as they're exposed willingly or unwillingly to these things? How is it what you need to know to have hope going forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's so key, because the only way we can really offer it to our kids in more than a trite way is the fact that it's been made real to us. And we need it in the same way, because it is devastating to be confronted with your kids going through something, going through anything, like seeing them struggle, being exposed to that. Like and it raises all sorts of questions about what could I have done differently? How could I have protected more? What should I have? And just as they need the gospel, I need the gospel too, because the hope for my children isn't that I'm going to do everything right as a parent, right? The hope for my kids' future isn't that I'm going to make every decision right, and I'm going to protect in every perfect way, and I'm going to respond in every perfect way. The hope for my children isn't even that when that happens, I respond perfectly in the moment. The hope for my children is that God's grace is bigger than all of that. And so I need to remember that. I need to remember that for myself, for the sake of my parenting, that it's not me and God that are trying to raise this kid and mold them correctly. It's me and this kid who both are sinners, imperfect, saved by God's grace, in desperate need of it, before a holy God. And for kids that haven't trusted in Christ yet, I think sometimes these same things provide a unique opportunity to convey to them, not just in words, but in our love and redemption, the reality of the gospel, the reality of not only our love for them, but of God's love for them, even in the midst.
And I think that pairs together with taking this issue very seriously, because the gospel doesn't make sin small or less significant. The gospel, like the reality of what the gospel means, is not overlooking and pretending that sin doesn't exist, or that it's not serious or deadly or dangerous. These things can go together. This intentionality and purposefulness about trying to help our kids see this positive vision and help them see the danger of some of these addicting kinds of sins, but also that there's love and hope and grace and forgiveness and peace available for us and for them through Christ.
Okay. Can I just say, just even as a testimony to that, like when I look at the things that my kids have learned, even the things that are most significant, that the Lord has impacted into their heart, I've actually been a little bit discouraged, because I can't look back and be like, oh, I remember the conversation where I taught you that. Right? I'm like, well, wait, how did you catch that? Like, how did this come about? Right? And I think far more significant than making sure you have the right conversation or say the right thing or react the right way is the genuineness of your own clinging to the gospel and knowing the gospel. And they, because they catch it in side comments. They catch it sometimes in sit down conversations, but sometimes just by watching you, by conversations they overhear. They catch it in all these different ways that can only flow from your own genuine dependence and reliance on the gospel, that I think impact and shape them. This is why I think Deuteronomy talks about, talking about him in all these different contexts, when you walk by the way and when you sit and when you rise. It's because if it's your authentic life, it's on your tongue, it's on your heart, it's on your mind, and it's not about getting that one conversation right. But it's about the impact of walking with Christ and them seeing that.
Well, it's probably a good place to wrap up. And since I'm the host, I'm going to give myself the last word. Whether you're talking about hope for your own idolatry and distractions with technology, hope when it comes to internet pornography let's be frank, for yourself, or for your children, One of the interesting things about being pastors is that we end up seeing more of the difficult things in people's lives than maybe your average person, because our job puts us in contact with some of people's struggles in ways that other jobs don't. So we are privileged and honored to be able to walk with people through more hard things than maybe your average person. But that also means we have the privilege of seeing more of what God does to actually change lives than maybe your average person. And so the Pastor's Podcast is here telling you that whether your kid just saw something that you wish that he or she didn't see, or you're wondering how you're ever going to get the idolatry out of your own heart, we could sit and tell stories of all the ways that people would never have thought certain lives would change, and they did. So the hope of the gospel isn't just hope to pacify your negative emotions while you go through something hard. It's hope that things actually can change and do change, because that's what God does. He actually loves you and he wants to grow you. And it's amazing what he can do because he's God. And like it says in Luke, nothing is impossible with God. So blessings on you. Thanks for being a part of this conversation, and we hope it was helpful to you. As always, your pastors and other wise people are around you in community to ask more questions and help you in the midst of your parenting and your own life. And we love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.